My father raised his wine glass that Thanksgiving as if he were about to offer some grand, heartfelt toast. Instead, he grinned around the table and said, loud enough for the grandchildren to hear, here's to the kids who make you proud, and the ones who mostly just occupy chairs. The room exploded into laughter, Mason's first and loudest. My sister-in-law covered her mouth, pretending it was all in good fun. Mom stared at the gravy boat like it might save her. I felt the familiar sting settle behind my ribs, the same one I'd carried since I was 7, but this time I didn't swallow it. I smiled, slow and deliberate, and lifted my own glass. Funny you mentioned space, Dad. I closed on an apartment yesterday. 3,000 miles should be plenty. You could have heard ice melt. Forks hung in midair. Mason's smirk faltered. He wasn't used to punchlines that punched back. Dad's knuckles went white around the stem of his glass, but he said nothing. He never did when the script went off book. Growing up in that split-level house on North Delaware Street, everything had a ranking. Mason's varsity letters were framed before the paint was dry. My regional science fair plaques got shoved into a shoebox in the furnace room. Dad measured worth in touchdowns and decibels. If Mason brought home a B-, it was still better than most kids when I came home with a perfect score on the physics midterm. Dad nodded once and asked if I'd taken out the trash yet. Mom's specialty was strategic absence. She perfected the art of being in the kitchen when voices rose, humming just loud enough to drown out whatever was said about her daughter. Don't rock the boat, Nora, she'd murmur, wiping a counter that was already clean. Her fear kept the peace, and her silence kept me small. The only person who ever looked at me like I was the main character was Grandma Ellie. She'd slip down to my corner of the basement every Saturday with a paper bag of almond croissants and sit on an overturned milk crate while I gutted old computers. You've got magic in those hands, she'd say, watching sparks fly from my soldering iron. Don't let anybody convince you it's ordinary. I learned early that machines don't play favorites. They break, or they work, and if you're patient, they tell you exactly why. People aren't that honest. By 17, I saved enough from repairing neighbors' laptops to buy a one-way ticket to California the day I turned 18. Dad's only comment was, long way to go for school. Hope you know what you're doing. He didn't come to the airport. Mom cried in the driveway, but still didn't say, I'm proud of you. I stopped waiting for it somewhere over Nebraska. Distance didn't fix him. It just made the favoritism easier to see from afar. Phone calls on holidays were always about Mason's promotion, Mason's kids, Mason's new boat. My master's degree in electrical engineering rated a distracted. That's great. Honey, while he flipped channels looking for the game, so when he made his little toast, something in me finally short-circuited. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just looked him in the eye, something I hadn't done in years, and spoke clearly enough for the whole table to hear. 3,000 miles, I repeated, standing. I'll send you the new address in case you ever want to mail something that isn't a guilt trip. I folded my napkin, set it beside my untouched plate, and walked toward the door. Mom's voice floated after me, thin and trembling. Nora, please. But she didn't follow. Nobody did. I stepped out into the cold Indianapolis night, the porch light flickering the way it always had, and pulled the door shut behind me with a soft, final click. They thought the story ended there with me storming out like some wounded teenager. They had no idea I'd already found the proof I needed. Buried in decades of tax returns and forgotten file folders in Grandma Ellie's attic after she passed? Proof that the golden child wasn't quite so golden, and that the man who decided I took up space had been taking a lot more than his share for years. But that revelation could wait. Tonight, I just got in my rental car, turned the heat on high, and drove toward the airport with the windows down and the city lights shrinking in the rearview mirror. I left the dining room without a scene, just the quiet scrape of my chair and the click of the front door behind me. The November wind hit my face like a slap, sharp and honest. Hale House loomed on the corner exactly as it always had. Red brick, white trim, Christmas lights already strung even though Thanksgiving had barely passed. Only now it looked diminished, like a stage set someone had forgotten to strike. Inside, I could almost script their conversation for them. First, a beat of awkward silence, then Mom's nervous laugh, Dad clearing his throat, Mason cracking a joke to reset the temperature. No one came after me. Of course they didn't. The drive to the hotel was 20 minutes of dark, empty avenues and old wounds opening like time-lapse flowers. Mason's 10th birthday, ice cream cake shaped like a football helmet, 30 people singing. Mine, 3 weeks later, a single-layer cake from Kroger, 6 candles, Dad on his phone checking scores. The robotics tournament where I took first in state, and he sent a text that said, "Proud of you, buddy," because he'd mixed me up with my brother again. Mom's specialty, pretending nothing was uneven, smoothing every edge until her fingerprints disappeared. By the time I reached the Courtyard Marriott, the ache had hardened into something cleaner. I wasn't running away anymore. I was refusing to stay small. I opened the chat with Grandma that I'd left on read for nearly a year and typed 4 words. In town, free, tomorrow. Her reply lit the screen before I could set the phone down. Always free for you, darling. She picked the same Greasy Spoon diner on Meridian she'd taken me to when I was 9 and heartbroken over a school play. I didn't get cast in. Same cracked red vinyl booths. Same waitress who called everyone hun. Grandma's hair had gone from iron gray to snow, but her eyes still saw straight through bone. She didn't ask why I'd walked out. She just folded my cold hands in her warm ones and said, "Your soul looks bruised, Nora, June." I told her about the toast. Dad standing at the head of the table, glass raised, voice thick with bourbon. And, certainty, to Mason, who's always known how to fill a room. The laughter that followed, the way no one noticed I'd gone until the pie was served. Grandma's lips pressed into a thin line. "Your father," she said, "mistook spotlight for love a long time ago. Some people never learn the difference." We spent the rest of the morning talking about things that actually mattered. The promotion I'd earned, the bookshelf I'd built myself. The view of Puget Sound from my bedroom window on the rare days the clouds parted. When I showed her photos of my new dining table, long, honest wood, 8 identical chairs. She traced the screen with one finger and whispered, "That's right. Nobody higher, nobody lower." Later at her little bungalow, I noticed the stack of bills on the desk, the reminder calls from the pharmacist she'd been ignoring because Dad had taken care of it years ago and never really had. She'd grown quieter, smaller, to keep the peace. I recognized the shape of that surrender. I wasn't going to repeat it. On the flight home, the Midwest fell away beneath me. Like a story I was finally done reading, Seattle greeted me with its usual drizzle, and for the first time it felt like permission. I painted the living room a color called borrowed light. I bought plants that didn't die. I stopped sending monthly updates to the family group chat that went unanswered anyway. When December came, I hosted Christmas dinner for the people who had shown up when I needed them. Jonah from 4B, who fixed my radiator at midnight, Professor Patel, who still wrote recommendation letters like they were love letters to potential. Camila, who once carried me 3 blocks to an Uber when I rolled my ankle. 8 of us around that table, passing platters, telling loud stories, no one checking their phone for the score of a game being played 1,000 miles away. I took a photo that night. Fairy lights, mismatched wine glasses, my friends laughing so hard Camila had tears on her cheeks. I posted it without a caption. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Just a single line beneath the photo she'd screenshotted. "We didn't know you had that many chairs." I stared at it for a long time, then turned the screen off and went to pour another round for the family I'd chosen. The table was full, the seats were level, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone to notice I belonged there. The phone rang on December 28th while I was elbow deep in sudsy water, scraping the last traces of holiday gravy from a platter. An unknown Indianapolis area code flashed across the screen. I almost let it die, but some tug in my gut made me dry my hands and pick up. He didn't bother with the greeting. "They're all talking about you, Nora." My father's voice was tight, metallic. "Those pictures from your little Christmas party? Your cousins captioned something about you finally having your own table? Do you know what that does to us?" I pressed the phone harder against my ear, the dish towel still bunched in my fist. "I didn't post them. You didn't have to. They're everywhere. Your mother can't walk into Kroger without someone asking why her daughter abandoned the family." The word abandoned landed like a slap. I answered before I could think. Maybe because someone once stood up at Thanksgiving, glass raised, and announced to 30 relatives that I'd take up too much space. Silence crackled. Then, a softer voice in the background. Grandma, faint but unmistakable Nora. "Honey, I saw the pictures. It looked like love. Real love," my father barked. "Mom, this isn't no," she cut in, sharp as winter air. "I'm tired of pretending silence is loyalty." He came back on the line. Quieter now. Venom cooled into something more dangerous. "You're coming home for New Year's. We'll sort this out." Old Nora would have folded. New Nora said, "Only if we sit as equals. Same chairs. No throne at the head. Take it or leave it." He hung up without another word. 2 days later, the doorbell rang at dusk. I opened it to find my parents on the threshold like travelers who'd taken a wrong turn years ago and only now admitted it. Mom stared at my welcome mat as if it might bite. Dad's eyes swept the hallway, hunting for flaws he could name later. I didn't give him the chance. Dinner's on the table I'd bought after I moved to Seattle long. Honest walnut waited under warm light. 3 identical chairs, no hierarchy carved into the wood. Dad noticed immediately. His mouth twitched, but he sat. We ate. Mom murmured that the salmon was perfect. Dad chewed like every bite owed him money. Halfway through, he finally spoke. "So, you've done all right for yourself." I set my fork down gently. "I've done more than all right. And you never asked. He opened his mouth, old reflex, but something stopped him. Maybe Grandma's voice still ringing in his ears. He deflated instead. We thought we were doing right by your brother. He needed everything. I finished. And I learned to need nothing. There's a difference. Mom's eyes brimmed. Dad looked suddenly older, the lines around his mouth deeper than I remembered. I didn't know how to love you without measuring, he said, so low, I almost missed it. The confession hung between us like a thread that might snap or hold, impossible to tell which. Mom reached across the table, fingers trembling. Can we learn? Slowly, I studied their hands that had once pushed me aside, now reaching without grabbing. I'm not moving back, I said. But the door stays open if you're willing to walk through it like guests, not landlords. Dad gave one stiff nod. We'll try. They left before the city lights came on fully. The click of the latch was soft, almost careful. I stepped onto the balcony and let the cold bite my face. For years, I'd measured my worth by how little room I occupied. That night, I felt the full length of myself and didn't apologize for any of it. Grandma called a few days later, voice sunny with relief. He told me everything. Didn't raise his voice once, just listened. I think you scared him in the best way. I laughed, watching gulls wheel over the water. Good. Winter eased into a pale, forgiving January. I kept cooking for one, then for friends, then for whoever showed up. I stopped bracing for criticism when someone said I looked happy. I let praise settle on me like it belonged there. One night I set a single plate at that long table and realized it no longer felt like a protest. It felt like home. Out on the balcony again, city glittering below, I said it out loud to no one and to everyone. Some daughters spend their lives trying to earn a seat. I built the whole damn table, and for the first time, the people who raised me asked if they could sit down. If you've ever had to carve your own place in this world, I hope you know you're allowed to take up space. All of it, unapologetically. Drop your story below if you've built your own table too. I read every single one.